Hi everyone, welcome to the agriculture session. Please make sure that you're in the right room. So just a brief intro on our work in Asia. We're interested in agriculture in transition. Agriculture is the primary livelihood source for many in Asia, and that's why we are really interested in looking at this aspect of agriculture. People are also living in a world where there is changing climate. Crop and livestock are highly susceptible to these changes, and we want to understand how it impacts farmers, women and children, and households. So the agriculture cluster in SEI Asia is a very small cluster, and our work is, welcome. Our work is just limited to one project right now, the Rice and Arsenic Project, with Miaojie, Dennis Wichlands, and Pin, who are not here today, and Matthew, we did together. And it's an example of what we would like to continue doing in the future with work in agriculture, because it exemplifies partnerships and also the livelihoods and health impacts of farmers. So what our work in Cambodia, we worked with CDRI, which is a research institute, and we also worked with the Agricultural Ministry, and we hope to work more with extension service workers as well as people on the ground, people who are really impacted by the health impacts of arsenic in rice. And what we have here to highlight is our three presentations. We're co-hosting the session with the York Center, which has done a lot of work on crop productivity in India mostly, and we're hoping that it's a session where we can strengthen partnerships within our center and other centers, and hopefully can learn from each other and see where we can take agriculture as an initiative perhaps at SEI to the next stage. So first we will have three presentations. Patrick will be presenting first, and then Lisa will be presenting, and Miao will be presenting afterwards. We can have a quick session afterwards of Q&As for clarification, and then Patrick will take over, and we'll have a panel session to talk about the challenges in agriculture and the opportunities in Asia. So over to you, Patrick.
Thank you. Yeah, so there are a few agendas really here as well on my side why we decided we would like to present this here. So I'm quite keen to see as well a better connectivity between the different centers in terms of agricultural research that is going on in or across SEI. I think it is a bit thin in some centers, which is, I think, fine, and the question would be whether we would like to invest into more agricultural research in different centers. So I guess that is something we could as well discuss at the end of this session. But I would like to give a quick overview of a few projects now we have been involved with during the last years in York. Lisa will give a second presentation which is more going into the kind of scientific background of what we're doing and the history as well, I guess, of our involvement in agricultural research. And then, you know, I would like to see whether that links up to the work as well you're doing in Asia. So I wanted to give you a quick overview of 4 projects that are rather different. How can I? All right, okay, good. Yeah, okay. Yeah, they're rather different. They all focus on India or India and Nepal. That is the geographical focus of our research. So this first one is a project that will come to an end in June this year. It is about sustainable crop production research for international development. It's called Resilient Rice. It was a rather large project funded by BBSRC and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. University of York, Cornell University, and what was called at that point Central Rice Research, now it's called National Rice Research Institute in India, was involved. And it was a biotech project, so the main idea was really to develop new drought and submersion resistant, but as well at the same time high yielding cultivars of rice using genetic information from ancestral wild species of rice. I was involved in 2 work packages. One was focusing on actually applying crop growth or crop yield models to see to what extent new cultivars would then lead to an increase in yield across India as well. And I've just decided to show you one picture over there, one graph that shows as well, or that shows the overlap between observed and modeled yield across India we did. So we focused mainly on rain-fed rice. If you go on, and we used this model called DSAT. We have our own crop growth model, Lisa will talk about a bit later, but we have as well this expertise in using DSAT across the region. And if you carry on, so the other work package I was involved with was about perception of farmers of climate change and to what extent they are wishing to see in terms of the breeding industry what kind of traits are really important for farmers in rice cultivars. And you remember maybe the title of this talk, so I would really like to concentrate as well on how we effectively communicate with farmers the kind of opportunities there are and how we can learn as well from them. So this is, and I'm rather self-critical, you know, so this is one of the typical projects where this kind of engagement with farmers came in late. It was in the proposal, but it came in quite late. And we were going out to these farmers, we were visiting a lot of villages in East India, so mainly Odisha and Jharkhand. And we realized that the main focus of the project, which is really developing these new varieties that are drought resistant and high yielding, you know, farmers weren't too interested in, to be honest, because they thought, well, you know, if we have a cultivar that is not performing well, then we use a different cultivar next year. So they're rather flexible. And when we asked them, so what are the traits in rice you're really interested in? Things came up like the new cultivars we have been provided with, for example, they are not as tasty as they used to be. Or the basmati rice is losing its fragrance and things like that. So it was really interesting to see that there was this really very high profile biotech project focusing on something the farmers in the region weren't really that interested in. And I think that is a typical problem of this kind of research, and that is really something I would like to highlight in this talk, and that is something I think SEI could really well address in future projects. So that is first project, if you go on. Second one is called Water, Rain, Hymn. It is funded by the Swedish Research Council. The main, the PI is the Swedish Meteorological and Hydrological Institute. And this is about changes in water resources and adaptation options in the Indian Himalayan basins. And we were called in because people wanted to know to what extent adaptation options should be targeted towards farmers or the farming sector. And we as well were asked how to come up with adaptation options that do actually have a benefit for all sectors involved. So it's as well about energy, it's about industry, it's about fresh water provision and so on. the main part of the project, again, was very much natural science-based. So we had hydrological modelers who basically for the entire Indo-Gangetic Plain did some scenario modeling, and it was interesting to see, for example, here, this one chart, which is the standardized precipitation index. You can see that the extreme events of, for example, rainfall or droughts are really increasing or expected to increase throughout this century. And then our task was really to develop these adaptation options. And we came in as SEI and we really challenged the hydrological modelers right from the start. So they had as well, they said, well, yeah, we want you to develop adaptation options. And we said, okay, the only thing really you have to then be prepared to do this as well. You have to listen to all these end users of these services in a way you provide. So we would like to have workshops with you as modelers and the end users together, and we would like you to accept questions from the audience, from the end users. So you have to present it in a way they understand it, and you have to listen to what they say, and then we have a second workshop, and you have to show us how you took the kind of input you got from the end users, from farmers, on board. So that you can claim in the end the farmers had a direct impact or direct input into your modeling. And it was quite a tough task, but that's exactly what we did. So we had 2 workshops, and the modeling results were presented to farmers in a way they could understand. And then we had discussion groups, and the farmer said, well, you know, this, for example, is not really of interest for us, this parameter. We don't even quite understand it, for example, like evapotranspiration rate. We are really interested in frequency of rainfalls, for example. So the second workshop was then really quite different because those results were then presented. The farmers showed an interest in doing the first workshop. And then we are now at a stage where we are getting to a point where we have adaptation options. We have identified adaptation options that are benefiting all sectors, but specifically as well the farming sector. And you know, these are, for example, shifting the growing season slightly, or shifting the sowing, using cultivars that are more adaptive to their environments, that are more adaptive as well to sudden, for example, sudden weather extremes. Yeah, I think we carry on. Third one is a new one I've just been asked to join in January this year. It's funded by the Norwegian Research Council. The PIs are based in Oslo. It is about climate services, and it's specifically about the governance of climate services. So when I heard that they asked me to come on board, I got in touch with Sukaina straight away because she is having this, or she's leading this initiative on climate services. And the idea of this one is really, and it's so there are 2 of us, two researchers on there, one from Oslo University and myself, who are the only natural scientists. Otherwise, they are all social scientists on the team. And we were asked to come in because, again, this is really about climate services that are of use to the farming community. And because we had worked in India in the farming sector, we were asked to join. It is focused on Maharashtra specifically, so on the western side of India. And the idea really is to develop effective governance and innovative open access and usable Indian climate services related to learning networks. So really to make sure that climate services are available to the farming community that are of use to the farming community. And then there was an analysis of farmer requirements. I wasn't involved in that one. That happened before I joined. But they went out to actually quite a few villages and got in touch with farmers and asked them, so what do you need? And it is quite interesting to see there that most of what we call climate services is actually not really of interest to farmers. What they need are agromat services. So they would like to know, so we were talking about different timescales there. Rather than us focusing on the next 20, 30 years, they said, well, we are mainly interested in the next 5 days, and maybe as well next year, the next growing season. So there's a clear difference between climate and agromat services. And I think that is, this difference is not being made in the entire discourse at the moment. And I think the interesting thing there is really that the link between the agromat and the climate services, that is really what is missing, and that is something we could focus on. Because I would argue, and that is as well what we're trying to investigate at the moment, I would argue that the climate services are actually rather important for the farming community, for the farming sector. Maybe they are not of importance at this point in time for the farmers, but if you think about planning, if you think about the breeding industry, for example, we need to know what kind of environments we have to expect during the next 20, 30 years so that the farming sector will be prepared for this. So I think the challenge is, and that is trying, we are writing a kind of concept paper at the moment. We would like to make sure that there's a link between agromat services and climate services, and that climate services can be presented as well to farmers, that they might develop an interest in climate services, and that there will be then as well a clear, well, let's say a participatory approach between, on the one hand, the end users, then the planners. It could be governmental planners, it could be as well planners from the corporate world, like breeders as well, so that we have a kind of preparedness for the agriculture during the coming 4, 5 decades. Okay, and then the last one. So this is a project that is again focusing on India. It's again the Norwegian Research Council. The colleagues, the PI again sits in Oslo, and this is looking at at climate extremes and air pollution, to what extent they've addressed as well, they have an effect on agroecosystems in the Indo-Gangetic Plain. We are providing much of the modeling expertise there, so this is our own model, and I think Lisa will talk about that in a moment. So we apply this model, which is a crop growth model, and the model accounts for at the same, so in a consistent manner. Basically, it accounts for the effect of climate change, or changing climate and air pollution, including as well effects on the water cycle, while doing these yield model runs. And again, this project had as well a socioeconomic part to it. So colleagues from Norway did some research into perception of climate change of farmers in India and Nepal. And similar to as well the rice project I showed first, farmers, for example, then said they don't have, so they all say, well, we can feel that there's a change in the weather pattern or in the climate, but we don't really see it as a problem so far. So they adapt without really knowing or being aware of the fact that they adapt, but they don't see it at the moment as a big problem as yet. Okay, and if you then go on, so I would now like to just have 2 more slides, actually no, 4 more slides, but 2 aspects. So one is really about the remaining challenges, and I would just like to list them for a discussion later on, and the opportunities. So the problem really is the change in rainfall during the monsoon specifically, and that a lot of summer crops suffer from drought periods suddenly during the monsoon period, and as well an increase in nighttime temperature, which leads to infertility of rice, for example. We have a problem in a lot of areas of India, and actually as well Southeast Asia, that what they call the winter growing season, the Rabi season, the growing conditions are getting worse, and there are more and more families who decide to basically not grow any crops any longer during the winter growing season, because it's just well, the return is not good enough. So there are more and more families who just focus on the one monsoon growing season. High-yielding cultivars often, because they have been, you know, the focus of the breeding sector has been really on high yields for quite some time, for the last decades. And by doing so, they have, unfortunately, as well bred some unfortunate patterns or traits into these high-yielding cultivars, like, for example, high susceptibility to air pollution, low water use efficiency, or, as I said as well, for example, a less good taste or less good fragrance, for example. There's an increasing demand for water resources. The Maharashtra study is showing at the moment that although people or farmers have been advised not to use, for example, sugarcane, but you know the highest return at the moment is by using sugarcane, but it's extremely water intensive, that crop, and that is putting then a pressure on, on the entire water system. And still the plan of the Indian government at the moment is to increase irrigation dramatically during the coming decades. There's really an increasing use of fertilizers with all its negative effects as well across South Asia. We saw over and over again when going through these different communities, farming communities, and I wonder whether that is the same in Southeast Asia, I'm not so sure about that, that the extension services, so the kind of expertise or advice that is given to farmers in terms of which cultivars to use, how to change for example, the management, that is not reaching all farmers, because you still have this kind of divide as well between different castes, and you could find, we visited villages where we walked from one village to another, and one village told us, well, we see the extension worker about once a month, and the other village said, well, we usually see it, if at all, once a year. So it's really, it's not in reach of all farmers, really, this advice. Okay, next one. So there's an increased use of hybrid cultivars, and you can't use their, as you probably know, their seeds in the next year, so there's an increased dependency on the seed market as well. There's an increased dependency on global markets. I would say it is partly as well self-inflicted, because there are some farmers who decide to, rather than focus on stable crops, they decide to, because they direct return is higher, to, for example, focus then on cash crops. But these cash crops are much more sensitive to changes in global markets or in the prices that are dealt with on the global market. There's definitely an interest, loss of interest in farming among younger generations. There are more and more families saying, well, our kids are not interested in doing this any longer because they can earn similar amounts if they go to the cities. There is as well a clear, because of that, a clear feminization of agriculture happening in India. Yes, so as I said, that's similar to what I said earlier. So I think the general preparedness has increased for weather extremes. But really the use of climate services to look into the future and to plan a bit ahead, that is not really, that hasn't been taken up yet. And yeah, the research funding and the focus of the research is often, well, focusing too much, you could argue, on biotechnologies, or maybe not too much, but it should focus on both biotechnologies and traditional farming as well, and how the knowledge from traditional farming could be used as well in these research projects, and to make really sure that those biotechnology projects focus actually on issues that are of importance for the farmer. Okay, and then quickly, a few opportunities. So there are definitely more drought and high-yielding crop cultivars on the market now. So farmers have a better choice of use the right cultivar for their growing conditions. The irrigation facilities have increased in India, so that means as well that the production is going up in those areas at least that have access to irrigation facilities. Agromet services have improved, so there are millions of farmers by now who actually receive on their mobile 5-day forecast, 3 to 5 day forecast, usually twice a week. Some of these services are actually based on information that is actually collected in the villages. So there are programs where there are MET stations in the villages. These readings are then fed back to the Indian Meteorological Department, and then they provide these 3 to 5 day forecasts. We believe that crop models could be used. Crop models, and as input to these crop models, climate or agromet data to inform policymakers and planners and breeders to prepare for future food security. So you can use crop models to show what an introduction of a particular crop or cultivar would mean in terms of yields. There's definitely a diversification of agriculture. As I said, more and more people are now focusing on cash crops with all its advantages and disadvantages. There is an increase in urban and peri-urban agriculture, and I think that is something our urbanization initiative could look at, for example. There are more and more incentives, subsidies and insurance schemes for farming, again with all its advantages and potentially as well disadvantages. And I think, can you, Corinne? Yeah, I think there are a few more. There is as well, I think, a slowly increasing recognition of the women's role in agriculture, and because of this feminization of agriculture, I think this is a rather important point, and again could be picked up as well by SEI, I think. Yeah, there is like I've shown as well in this project, I think there is an increase as well in participatory researches or in participatory approaches to research in agriculture, so that researchers are really at the beginning of projects even reach out to the farming community and ask really what they are interested in, and even ask them to contribute, for example, to the development of models. And this is then as well linked to the co-creation of research projects and agendas. Right, and co-creation of tools, yeah, that's what I just said. So my argument really is, I think this transformation of Indian agriculture has started quite some time ago already, so we are in the midst of it. There are still quite a few large steps to take. About adaptation, for example, as well, you know, there are the farmers have started to adapt. Some knowingly, others non-knowingly really, but they have started to adapt, and it is really now a question, does it need better governance as well to be prepared for the changes that we are waiting in terms of change in climate. And then my question really is, if you go to the next question, what is SEI's role in this? And I would like to see that discussed later on in the session. Sorry, I think I took a bit longer. Sorry, as always.
Okay, that was really interesting, Patrick. I almost think I should have gone first and you should have gone second, because what I'm going to talk about is really coming very much from a natural science point of view, and I think everything that Patrick has said in that talk should almost follow on from what I'm talking about, because I think how we actually use some of this natural science to understand social science and how that might inform agricultural development is perhaps one of the key things we need to be talking about here. Okay, so you're saying I've got 5 minutes. I was going to struggle to do this in about 12, so I'll see what I can do. And Michael, there's lots of little things, so you might just need to keep sort of pressing. And then when I stop talking, you'll realise you've pressed too far. Okay, so I'm talking about a pollutant in particular, ozone. And we believe that ozone is having quite a large impact on crop yield across South Asia and probably Asia as a whole. And there's lots of people that were just on that list that have... I'm really giving this talk on behalf of these other people listed here. Steph Divya, who's in the audience, David Gillies, our programmer, Patrick, and myself. Okay. So why is ozone a particular threat to agriculture? We can understand this by... So this is over the course of a year. You can see that blue line gives you an idea of the ozone concentrations. You can sort of pick out when the monsoon period occurs in Asia because the ozone concentrations dip quite a lot there. The pollution gets washed out of the atmosphere. And then just to note here, look at something like wheat, the wheat crop growing season here. So your wheat growing season overlaps with your high ozone concentrations. So we think that makes wheat actually quite vulnerable to ozone concentrations. And ozone, just for people that aren't completely familiar with this, it's a secondary pollutant. It's formed from emissions of NOx, methane, non-methane VOCs, and carbon monoxide under the presence of sunlight, which is why it's particularly important for agriculture, because most agriculture grows under sunny conditions. Okay, and then this is a map which gives you an idea of where across the globe ozone concentrations are particularly high. If you look at Asia, South Asia, East Asia, the hatched bits there give an indication of where you have the really high ozone concentrations that might be causing something like 5 to 10% yield losses according to current risk assessment methods. And then the little charts give you an idea from 2000 out to 2050 as to how those ozone concentrations might change in the future. So again, South Asia, East Asia, under different RCP scenario pathways, you see that generally it looks like it's going to get worse, and it's already a problem at the moment. Okay, so how does ozone affect agricultural productivity? A couple of different ways. It can cause visible injury. You can see sort of early senescence. I'll come back to senescence in that top right-hand picture there. It can also... Oh, you're going really fast now. It can also change the amount of biomass that you actually have. This is a wheat plant, wheat plants which are grown just outside Lahore in Pakistan. The really spindly, ill-looking one there was actually the one grown in the external ambient conditions, so under just ambient ozone pollution levels. Really poor growth compared to one that was grown in a chamber which had the pollution filtered out, so a clean growing plant, if you like. It affects yield, as you can see there. And then finally, this gives an indication of some biomonitoring that we did as part of a project many years ago. You can see the kind of yield losses that we actually found from biomonitoring experiments here, something sort of in the region of sometimes 20 to 30% yield losses, giving an indication that the damage that we were thinking our models might predict was actually seen on the ground in these experiments. Okay, so how do we assess ozone impact? We use empirical data, and we tend to produce these dose-response relationships. So it's a little bit like the kind of concentration-response relationship that is used to estimate impacts of air pollution on human health. We can do a similar thing with agricultural crops. And I've put this black box here to give an indication that really what you're doing as an experimenter is you're fumigating with a pollutant, and then you're seeing what the yield loss is. You don't really understand what the mechanism that's causing that yield loss actually within the plant. So that's represented by the black box. We can start to open that black box by using models which give us an idea of how you change from a concentration of a pollutant that is surrounding a plant to understand the effect of meteorology in actually determining how much of that external pollutant concentration is taken up through the stomates of the plant to actually cause damage. That's a good one. So, ozone reduces yield. So we have this kind of black box empirical approach, our dose-response relationship, and we know that ozone can reduce photosynthetic function. I've identified things that you probably won't have heard of before, VCmax and ASAT. So these are photosynthetic parameters that we know ozone impacts. So it will reduce photosynthesis, reduce carbon assimilation, and thereby reduce productivity. And we also know that ozone shortens the duration of the flag leaf. So the slide that showed a picture earlier of a leaf going browner more quickly is basically senescence. So on this picture here, you can see that this is the day of year. So you can see that a plant which has no ozone, which is on the side near Michael, has a nice long flag leaf duration, whereas one which has been fumigated by ozone on my side has a really short duration of the flag leaf. So that means the flag leaf isn't going to be taking in carbon, it's not going to be putting that carbon into the grain yield, and you're going to have a lower productivity. Okay, so what we've been trying to do with the dose model that Patrick showed earlier, which we have to refine because this is a picture of a tree, and it needs to be a picture of a crop in here. We've been trying to use this empirical data to develop our crop modelling methods, and I've just focused on the leaf here to give you an indication that what we're really focusing on here is this photosynthesis. This is photosynthesis, and I'm not going to try and explain this to everybody, but basically we have, if any of you did A-level biology, then we've got light reactions and dark reactions which make up the fixation of CO2 in photosynthesis in the plant. We have a biochemical model that can simulate this. And then we have our carbon coming in from CO2, which is up there, through the stomates, which is then fixed and then produces net photosynthesis and gives us carbon assimilation. Right. So if you keep pressing the button, you'll see how we think we can bring in certain different factors, so pollution and climate, that we think are affecting this photosynthesis, and therefore should allow us, in theory, to have a tool that will be able to tweak and change certain climatic and pollution parameters to then understand how that affects photosynthesis, the uptake of CO2, the uptake of other pollutants, to then give us a change in our net photosynthesis, our net carbon assimilation, and therefore the growth of the plant. We've been developing this using experimental investigations. We've got some solar domes, which allow you to fumigate plants. We've got different types of equipment that allow you to measure photosynthesis on the plant. So you can understand these different cardinal points of photosynthesis, which allow you to parameterize the model that I showed you before, and also to measure leaf senescence. So we've got photosynthesis and leaf senescence. Okay, so that means that rather than having this kind of very empirical approach, which we had before, we can now open the black box further and still use these models, but then start to bring in interacting stresses. So now I've got meteorology, which we can perhaps call climate change, CO2, nitrogen, aerosol, and ozone impacts all on yield. So it's a way of getting to an idea of multiple stresses and how they might affect crop productivity. Evaluation, how long have I got? Sort of minus 3 minutes. Okay, I'll try and go through these quickly. Obviously, we have this, it's quite a sophisticated model. It's in development. We need to see if it works, so we need to try and evaluate it. So we're working with AgMIP. Just flick through these. We're sort of bringing together a group of people to look at different modeling methods. We're developing an AgMIP ozone protocol, identifying empirical data sets. Then we're going to have, sorry? Oh, sorry, that's a good question. AgMIP is the Agricultural Modelling Intercomparison Programme. So basically, it's a bunch of crop modelers who come together with their models and try and work out which one works best. So we've got empirical data sets, and then the idea behind this is to develop global modelling experiments so that we can try and work out which emission control strategies might benefit crop productivity best. Adaptation. So this is something else that Steph in particular was looking at, and this is the fact that over the course of years, 1950 out to 2000, if you look at the data, that empirical data of different cultivar responses to ozone, you get the sense that the more recently released cultivars are actually more sensitive to ozone. And this kind of comes back to something Patrick was saying about trying to understand which cultivars are best to use in which situations. Okay? And this is just something else from Cuba. Just flick through this and I'll try and describe it. But basically, in Cuba, they've actually set up an early warning system for ozone. so that when they can foresee there's going to be an ozone episode, they tell the farmers and they ask the farmers to change their management strategy to stop irrigating, for example. And I think if the farmers don't actually do that and they lose their crop due to ozone, then there's the suggestion that the insurance company won't actually pay out. Mitigation, I think we're nearly there. This is Divya's work. So basically here, we're understanding the fact that ozone can have an impact on the crop. That can affect the biomass quality, and it can also cause this earlier senescence. That means that the litter input to the soil will change, and you might also have changes in decomposition rates, which will alter your carbon sequestration. At the same time, you might have changes in your root biomass and the root exudate that you get from your roots, which will again affect your decomposition rate and again affect your carbon sequestration. So you've got a situation where ozone is impacting on soil carbon dynamics, which then might mean that you've got less ability to sequester carbon in the soils. You might have more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and then you've got this sort of feedback to climate change. And then this is the last slide, you'll be pleased to know. But this is just an idea, really. So this is coming very much from a natural science point of view. We're sort of interested in maybe wondering whether this could actually relate to climate-smart agriculture and maybe bring some different aspects of work that are going on across SEI together. So we've got emissions, which we know about through the LEAP IBC tool and the LEAD-P development pathway. Got climate and atmospheric chemistry modelling. We've got the deposition and the impacts, which is what I've talked about here. And then we've got some sort of policy response to try and make the situation better. And I think that's it, apart from my summary, which I'll leave everybody to read. Okay, thank you.
Like May said before, our agriculture is quite small, and I'm presenting on behalf of our agriculture, but this project, of course, also involved Matthew before. Next, yes. As you may actually already know that the arsenic issue in Bangladesh, because of the geological weathering of arsenic-rich materials from the Himalayas, so this arsenic, because of the geological weathering of arsenic-rich material in Himalaya, arsenic actually accumulated in the lower delta, for example, in Bangladesh, and also in the lower Mekong, lower Mekong plain in Cambodia, in Red River plain in Vietnam. Groundwater is used to irrigate rice in Bangladesh, and also it's okay. Groundwater is used to irrigate rice in Bangladesh and also in Cambodia. Plus, Cambodia recently have this policy to encourage irrigate rice with groundwater in dry season. Next. Yes. In the flooded field, when there's no oxygen, the arsenic is mobilized into a mobile form that can be taken up by the rice plant. Therefore, the consumption of arsenic-tanned rice is a public issue in Bangladesh and also in the arsenic hotspot in Cambodia. Therefore, we conducted this arsenic project aiming to understand the arsenic uptake issue in Cambodia and also to provide a platform to discuss farm level and regional measures for reducing arsenic uptake in rice. You can click one more time. These are our partners. Basically, in this project, we did interviews and a workshop with these partners from the government, universities, private sector, intergovernmental organizations, and NGOs. Our key partner here is the General Department of Agriculture in the Ministry of Agriculture in Cambodia. They co-hosted this workshop with us. Here are some key findings from our interviews and workshops. Basically, the arsenic contamination in the groundwater is quite known in the country. Some wells in this Kandal province, which is the closest province to the capital city Phnom Penh, have water with more than 1,000 ppm of arsenic, which is pretty high compared to the WHO standard, which is 10 ppb. Cambodia aimed to be a major rice export country, competing with Thailand, Vietnam, and also India. They aim to import 1 million rice by the end of 2020. Currently, they only reached half of its goal. Evidence of arsenic uptake in rice in Cambodia has been uncovered by one university professor. However, only exported rice has been tested for arsenic. There's limited awareness of arsenic in rice compared to the contamination in groundwater, even if they are the experts in the rice sector or the university. They still they actually didn't hear of this issue until they joined our workshop. However, strong concern has been expressed by the government representative during the workshop. From what we learned during the workshop, that arsenic in rice is more of an economic concern than public health issue. However, they require us to provide more evidence-based research results to show that there is actually arsenic contamination in rice in Cambodia. Yes. In the workshop, we had the group discussion. We divided the group into three to talk about the priorities of this area and what are the potential future research topics. So the first one is the water management and agronomy. They identified the food security as the first priority, followed by the food quality and safety. There are three potential research for us to consider in the future. The first one is change cropping practices. For example, in the previous Kandal province, they plant lotus instead of rice in the dry season. The second one is to maximize the use of surface water for irrigation and also improve the rainwater harvesting system or investments in long-term and short-term water storage reservoirs. The last one is the trials and research demonstrations to illustrate the feasibility of these changes. The second group focused more on the policy side and the investment. Firstly, they identified the main role of the government, which is to conduct the research on arsenic and to support the outreach activities. The second one, they want us to focus on the education for the public, more specifically for the next generation. For example, educating the school children on the arsenic exposure pathways and the mitigation measures. The last one under this group is joint effort with all stakeholders. More specifically, they talked about the private sector. They discussed about what roles the private sector should play and which forms should be involved in this process. They think that private sector should be more responsible for the consequences of the arsenic in rice to guarantee the high quality of rice export. The last one is specifically on the research topics for us to consider in the future. The first one is to conduct a risk assessment to study the extent of groundwater use for irrigation and to what extent the arsenic is uptaken by rice. The second one is about the rice variety to determine their affinity to the arsenic. The last one is to understand at which stage the rice will uptake arsenic when it grows. To conclude this one, the participants asked us to produce a policy brief for the policymakers with our research findings to suggest the way forward. That's all. Thank you very much.
No. Okay, so we have now a panel discussion, and can you just remind me how much time do we have? Because we started late, but...
We have about 40 minutes.
Okay.
So each panelist can have 2 to 3 minutes.
Yeah, okay. So can I ask first the panel members to come up, please? So it's Divya, and it's Lisa, and it's... Kalpana, exactly. Couldn't see you. And I would like to ask you first to maybe spend 2 to 3 minutes just explaining what your expertise is in terms of agriculture, what your interest is, and maybe you could as well quickly discuss as well where you see your role in SEI's approach to agricultural research. Kalpana, would you like to start?
Sure. Okay, thank you. I think in relation to agriculture, I really do not wear a hat of an agriculturist. I think I'm more of an action researcher who tries to bring the participatory lens to understand the agriculture issues. So currently, I was involved in a project where we actually used citizen science approaches to understand the transition agriculture farming practices, such as home gardens in Thailand. So I would be sharing the insights that we got through that project with you today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Divya?
Thank you. So good afternoon. So my work mainly revolves around understanding the interactions of plant-soil system with environment. So right now I'm involved into developing DOS model that Lisa just explained, and basically I'm working to open the black box a bit. So basically I'm working to understand how the plant physiology interacts to environmental stresses, particularly ozone, but also in terms of modeling, also to account for water stress and temperature changes. I'm mainly focused on understanding how these changes that are happening in plants are further connected to the interaction of below ground processes. So basically, particularly I'm looking into carbon dynamics. Besides this research work, I have some experience of working in India and also South Asia, considering mainly about the management practices in terms of how the greenhouse gas efficiency of rice cultivation systems can be improved. So I'm more or less focused mostly on plant soil systems and not only looking at the crop yields.
Thank you, Divya. Lisa?
Okay, so I probably don't need to say too much. I didn't think, having gone on for long enough already. I think that there's perhaps just a couple of things that I think would be interesting to hear what other people think. Within the York Centre, we've talked quite a bit about this idea of yield gaps, trying to understand what contribution the different stresses that are reducing agricultural productivity might have to the kind of yield gap that you get within different agricultural systems. And I guess one question would be whether the kind of model that we've been developing, Divya, myself and Patrick, could actually help to understand those yield gaps. So that would be one question. And I think the other question from my point of view, which is probably going back to you, Patrick, a little bit, is so this idea of transformation of agriculture in Asia, what do we actually mean by that? Is that something that's an intended transformation, or is that something more that's just happens to have been agricultural development in the region and we're calling it this transformation? And recently, yesterday or 2 days ago, I read a paper which was talking a little bit about the colonization of agriculture in Asia, and it was making the case that agriculture is very often driven from a sort of more Western view of agriculture, that we're kind of really focusing on trying to ensure food security, so we're focusing on trying to increase food supply, increase productivity as much as we can, maybe using techniques such as sustainable agriculture. Is that what we should be doing, or should we be thinking more about the kind of social side of agriculture that you were talking about, Patrick, and perhaps thinking about agroecology type of agriculture instead, which then has a focus maybe on rural livelihoods to a greater extent than just trying to produce as much food as possible.
Okay, thank you. So what I would like to do is I have a few questions or a few items I would like to follow up with you upon based as well, I guess, around what Lisa just said at the end. And then I would really like to open the floor because we are quite interested to see as well where you're coming from, whether you have any views as well, keeping in mind what expertise SEI has and to what extent we could contribute to this entire debate about transformation of agriculture in Asia. So if I pick up the last point Lisa made, I do wonder whether you have any ideas, and I might specifically ask Kalpana and Divya there, do you have an idea how agriculture, or do you have a vision how agriculture might look like in South Asia or Southeast Asia, and is there some indication how things are changing already at the moment? Could you maybe just let us know what your perception is? Okay.
Yeah, I think that is a very interesting question which was being made, and so it is really about, like, I think the agriculture scenario is going to change, that is for sure. Who really is driving it? I think that's where the discussion should be focusing on, because one of the key things which is happening, especially in Southeast Asia, is that there is a transition of moving from subsistence-oriented, household-based agriculture to corporate-based agriculture. So a lot of big companies and corporations are actually entering into agriculture sector, where yield is primarily considered the one and only factor that defines agriculture. However, then there are other different values that also comes along with the farming is associated within Southeast Asia. And recently we did a research on home gardens where the identity of farmer, as the home gardeners explained, was not only related to production, though it was one of the important factors, but then the ability to self-feed their families, their neighbors in certain cases, and to be able to contribute to the society. I think that was seen as such an important factor for them that they wanted to continue. And they still wanted to look for ways on what they can do to actually preserve that type of farming styles, even in managing their home gardens. But then there was this younger generation, even the children, who really do not want to engage with that type of farming technologies and techniques, because there's comparatively, I think it's the economic returns coming out of it is very less. So I think for sure, one thing is I think the traction of agriculture on a household level is going to be reduced. There is also issues of like the labor shortages that is going to be provided in agriculture. And will agriculture be actually economically attractive enough, even if we consider yield as an important factor? I think those would be the three key issues in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Divya, could you maybe let us know the kind of Indian perspective?
I can try. In my view, well, India is an important part, and Asia as a whole is currently maybe considered as an engine of economic growth, and it's a place which is in an extremely dynamic conditions. So as Kalpana said, that there are various perspectives that how the transformation is going to happen, what are the drivers that will lead to transformation, but transformation is definitely going to happen. The timeline, perhaps, I'm not the person who can surely tell or approximate. But in my understanding, and also based on what I know from the literature or published reports, is that the farmers are quitting out of agriculture. But that is perhaps not a big deal at the moment, because agriculture is the absorber of the surplus labor. So maybe it's not really a matter that farmers are quitting out, but definitely it means that the intensification, the way we do intensification of agriculture, particularly looking in the Indian case, it becomes very much important. But how that transformation is really possible, because number of smallholder farmers is very large in such countries, and most of the labor comes from family members. So it's not the somebody to hire for agriculture, and agriculture is generally not a business. It's partly subsistence, and the surplus is sold. So the condition is that the labor is quitting out. There are relatively better opportunities in cities. So as you said, the feminization of agriculture is also happening place. So based on my understanding, in near future, we may see a reorganization of these small farmer holding communities, and that can lead to evolution of cooperatives or bigger investors investing into agriculture. And that is what I read in a recent report from Asian Development Bank, that it is actually suggested that industrialization of Asian agriculture is important if Asia has to develop. And the rate of transformation actually has been lower than it should have been, particularly for a country like India. So in that case, it's a hypothetical theory that is suggested in that report. But in my opinion, whether this transformation will make the trajectory that is suggested exactly mentioned there, because Lisa said that it is based on the theory that has been experienced so far. So as the climate is changing and Asian socioeconomic conditions are also very complex, so maybe the trajectory will be defined by these different actors. And also maybe it's a possibility for us to explore that what would be the best strategy to move towards a better system or better way of reorganization. That are my reflections, but I'm not really very good expert of economics, so.
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot. No, but I think what is quite clear here is that you know, the nature of farming will change in Asia, and I think we can all feel that and see it to a certain extent. I guess working for an institute that is interested in environment and development, the question would be, to what extent is the change or the transformation that is already happening now, to what extent is that sustainable? And when I talk about sustainability, I mean economic sustainability, I mean as well ecological sustainability. So to what extent is really this trajectory that has already started in a way, is that really supporting, for example, or is that preparing small-scale farmers for these changes? Is it as well, you know, how about the natural resources? Are these resources going to be exploited to an extent that is just not sustainable? And the question is whether everything what we have heard so far is just happening as it is, so just as, let's say, an ad hoc process, or is there as well some kind of governance behind it, and do we need some steering in that process? So Lisa, if I may ask you, so what do you think will be the role of science then, or scientific evidence, in terms of guiding this kind of trajectory and as well guiding the governance of these schemes, if we believe that governance is important?
Well, I'll have a go at answering that question. I think, just coming back to something that Kalpana said, so I think it's so important for us to understand what's really driving this transformation, or who's driving this transformation. And I come back to the paper that I read again, which obviously impressed me quite a lot. Is this being driven by people in the West who have not necessarily sustainably intensified their agriculture, and they're just thinking, we need to just increase more food supply, and this is the way we've done it, so this is the way it should be done around the world. So that's, are they the drivers, and should they be the drivers? And I might argue maybe they shouldn't. I mean, you and I know that in the UK, we have this big northern powerhouse of universities, NA Agritech movement at the moment, which is people who were sort of involved in the project that you were talking about, really focusing on crop breeding and trying to increase the yields of certain cultivars by a few %, and they think that is the solution to food security. Whereas actually, you know, already we have a very food insecure world, and it's more related to food access and economics than it is about food supply. So I'd almost just be interested to know what people think about where should we really be putting the focus of those efforts, and should it, it feels to me as if it's being driven by the West, and I'm not sure that that's the right thing to do. But
okay, so I guess we could open the floor. I think one thing before I open the floor, one thing is maybe we could discuss that as well. So if we're talking about the ecological effects as well of intensification, which is probably what's going to happen, so how important is as well this kind of drive at the moment for organic agriculture? And I know that there are some initiatives in India and in Southeast Asia. So if you maybe keep that in mind, and if someone wants to comment on that, that would be great. So are there any comments or questions? So I start with Matthew and then with Matthew. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Oh, thanks. Thanks very much for your input, everyone. Yeah, my interests, there's a couple of interests, but I'll try and focus on this sort of agroecology questions that I think are important. And I think I agree with Lisa's sort of general concerns about the direction or objectives of this process. And specifically from what I was listening, Patrick, to your talk when you were looking at going to historic variants of rice crops in order to sort of build resilience into the crops of different climatic conditions, in a way that again is trying to lead to finding the perfect seed for all situations. And what that seems to almost conversely go against is the importance of genetic variation within particular crops. So in a way you're trying to source genetic variation and resilience through its variation from these historic crops, but then you're almost taking that one and then trying to roll it out across a large area, which to me sounds contradictory. So to what extent is there more kind of localized, or is there interest or knowledge, or has anyone seen any experience of using multi-cropping of different variants on a particular small-scale level, which has a lot more resilience, genetic biodiversity-based resilience, than a sort of monocrop idea. So that would speak more towards this agroecology, and it would also look at the sort of decentralization of agricultural variation management, which I think would be perhaps a kind of positive avenue. I also have another question about insurance mechanisms, but I'll save that one perhaps. Yeah.
Okay. I collect 3 questions first, and then I come back to the panel.
Yeah, I don't have a question. I have more information, if that's okay. Yeah. This was quite interesting because I worked on a project a few years ago that looked at the publications, peer-reviewed publications related to smallholder rice production in South Asia, which is one of the most food insecure parts of the world and in Asia. And we were trying to see if there was any kind of correlation between what research was being done on the kind of food production in those areas versus where the actual opportunities were for increasing production. And what we found that there was a massive focus on yield in the research, but actually if you were to look at any work on the yield would perhaps increase the production by a few percentage points, but actually socioeconomic factors, so away from abiotic, but socioeconomic factors had a proportionally much greater impact, and yet there was much less research on those areas. And I just think it was this that project that we did would actually inform perhaps part of the focus for this, taking this forward, because it touched a lot on all the different factors that contribute to food losses, and obviously the low-hanging fruit is not necessarily yield, but it lies elsewhere.
Thank you.
I just want to make a comment on one of the questions you touched on with regards to organic, and that is a movement within Thailand. And I think for me, own personal experiences with friends who are based in Bangkok, who maybe come from a farming background, have actually now gone back and actually try to introduce new methods for organic farming. So I think there's maybe some slight movement, I think, within Thailand for people who are, and it's also because driven by interest from cities in Thailand and Bangkok here now, a lot of people are trying to go organic and eat organic, and so there's a lot more demand for it, both in the country and also for export. So personally, I see that as something that's happening. But then on that question where you asked about the role of science and how that sort of drives transformations within the countries, I think for me, just part of the work that I've been involved in most recently involved a visit to an agricultural bank in Pakistan, which has the institutional mechanism been set up where they provide technical advice in addition to the money that they're lending to farmers, and they mentioned that they collaborate with the National Council for Research Agriculture or Research Center, and then there are also these discussions where banks have been and also government have been sort of driving policy and stating that banks have to provide at least 20% of their lending to agriculture, etc. So I think those are kind of entry points for if you want to look at transformation, that something that should be maybe considered in some of the work that you're doing, how you engage with the financing side for agriculture.
Okay, thank you. So 3 points really. Oh, okay. Yeah. Another one.
I have a question for all panelists. I just want to ask, in your opinion, do you think that farmers have no choice but to scale up into cooperatives and into commercial agriculture as we've seen in the West? Is there something that's different for Asia where identity is so centered, where a rice farmer is a rice farmer and not a coconut farmer or any other type of farmer? So are we witnessing not just a change in agriculture, but a whole change in perhaps society?
Okay, so we have a couple of different aspects here. So one is really genetic diversity, and I guess as well diversification of agriculture in principle, which is linked to the, I would argue is as well linked to the organic movement, and it's as well linked to what May just said. So do farmers have a choice? Would it be interesting for them? Would it be valuable for them to come up with, or could they sustain a small scale farming that would be maybe diverse? And then as well the issue whether focusing on yield is just the right instrument really. Who would like to start first?
I'm very interested in the first question actually, because this idea of multiple cropping is perhaps one of the best methods of creating a resilient agricultural system, because it's not only resilient against any weather fluctuation, but also against pests and other factors, because you are not growing one crop, so it's a kind of society that is growing among itself. But also in the long term, if we look at the traditional farming systems like this, the soil quality is often neglected, and when we look into the monoculture, large-scale mechanized farmings, we are not only, well, because we are only focused, right now the agriculture is yield-focused mainly, but we neglect the quality of soil. With the monoculture and intensive farming, the soil carbon goes down, and also the soil microbial community, microbial diversity also goes down, and it's the large knowledge gap that we have no understanding, no clear understanding of how these microbial diversity contribute to soil functioning. And especially in India, in the Indo-Gangetic Plains, which is the food bowl of India, where Green Revolution took place, they are facing currently a very massive problem of soil degradation, mainly because of this intensive agricultural practices, over-irrigation. These are some of the factors that have been identified. So if we are looking into long-term sustainable agriculture, we cannot neglect the quality of soil that is changing, because we cannot assume that the quality will remain the same. And in terms of agriculture, buffering the risks that are coming through climate change, air pollution, and other multiple stresses, because we don't know, there may be some known and maybe some unknowns. So we have to look into all these things, and perhaps suggesting or prescribing any single methodology for sustainable agriculture, maybe it's tricky.
And just to answer that as well, you also have an increased boundary effect, because each small holding, obviously, within your small holding, if you have multiple cropping, you have microbial soil diversification as well. But because it's very difficult to coordinate your farm plot with your neighbour's farm plot, you actually have a multiplying effect where you've got much greater diversity in the whole region. Yeah. So, again, it just compounds the benefits that you get from that.
I guess there's as well an economic aspect to it. I mean, you're just much more vulnerable if you really concentrate just on one crop or one variety. Okay, Kalpana or Lisa, would you like to pick up on Kalpana? 2 minutes. 2 minutes each.
2 minutes, okay. If 2 minutes, then I think I'll take the question of, farming as an identity, and can that really survive? And I think that's a very difficult question. Again, like linking back to the Thailand case, the old generation really want to survive or revive the tradition, because they really see the value of being a farmer. And it's not, again, limited only to producing or in terms of yield. But then the younger generation really do not value the identity of farmer as important as their parents perceive it, right? And I think if we are thinking about next 20, 30, 50 years, then it's the younger generation who is actually going to be much more vocal and active in their processes. So I really do not have an answer to that, but I think I would really like to throw this question again back here, is that, because we are primarily an environment organization, we talk about like, what is the best deal out of it? How do we guide? How do we advise? So in that relation, I think identity is also very much related to the lifestyle. As much as, for example, reflecting back personally, as much as I want to be a farmer, can I really be a farmer? The transition around me has been so rapid, and I'm already a part of this cash-engaging economy. So what I really want to see, is environment, home gardens is a fantasy that I really dream, or is it also real, right? And I think there are these hard questions that we also have to ask, because on one hand, we really talk about big ideas and like there are big cooperatives and all that going on, but then we are also in some ways, I think, complacent to that system which is happening around us. So unless we can revive the identity and the lifestyle of farming as the sustainable lifestyle to actually aspire for, and for younger generation to get the meaning and the financial value out of it, I think we can't really provide an option to the farming identity or vision. Thank you.
Okay. Lisa, last point.
Okay, well, maybe just a sort of following up a little bit on that. I'm kind of wondering, is it, we're kind of thinking about this as it's either one thing or another, and should we maybe be thinking about it more as a kind of bigger diversity, the fact that we can have different types of agricultural landscape that could maybe support each other if we think about it cleverly enough. And that kind of refers a little bit to this idea of land sparing that's sort of coming up in the agricultural literature, I think. So the idea that you might have some areas which you farm using, hopefully, sustainable intensification methods. So that's ensuring that you have that high productivity. But that might allow you in other areas to use less intensive approaches and maybe have this kind of agroecological farming, which might then help support larger rural communities. And I think that might be something interesting to think about, at least. And then just a tiny reflection, I think, on the socioeconomic side of things. I think when you are talking about subsistence farmers, you've got two things that kind of, in some ways, almost perhaps might contradict each other, where if you're thinking about food access, you're wanting to bring down the price of food. But then if you're a subsistence farmer, your livelihood and the income that you get coming into your household is reliant on having a higher price of food that you're selling. So there's a kind of balance there, and I'm not quite sure how we go about trying to address that so that you're developing things for the good of the consumers and the producers.
Okay, thanks a lot. Okay, unfortunately we have to stop here, but I would just like to first of all thank the panel. Give them a round of applause, please. And I would just, so what I wanted to get out of this discussion was really, first of all, to make sure that we are aware of what kind of projects are going on in the agricultural area across SEI, and I think we have achieved that. I thought it was quite informative, and I think by doing so we have as well learned what kind of expertise we have in different areas related to agriculture, I think. And personally I think there's clearly a link between the work we do in York and the work we do in Asia, in the Asia office. We don't have someone here from the Africa office, but I think that would be interesting to link up to them as well. But I do think that you know, we should think about cooperations and collaborations there, and I would like to pick up on this, and we will get in touch with you guys, and if you have any ideas. So I think this is I think specifically the link between the kind of natural resource base and how that will change over the future, in the future over the next coming decades, and how that is linked really to livelihoods and to socio-economic effects. I think that is something where SEI could really bring some new ideas to the table and could develop maybe an interesting research program, maybe an initiative. Let's see. Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Questions are so tough. So difficult questions.
Sorry?
They're so difficult questions.
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
you really don't have answers.
Thinking you guys are the ones that can be answering those.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, okay.
But yeah, I'm kind of getting a sense there is, I don't know too much about this area, but you sort of think, you know, this whole, when people talk about this agricultural transformation, it's as if it's a fait accompli, it's as if it's something that's going to happen, and that's the sense that I get. And the sort of thing, has anybody actually sort of stood back and thought, well, what should be happening?
I think, I don't know, you know, it's quite a difficult question. Like, if I can talk from my experience in Nepal, like my father is an agriculture scientist, right? Okay. So we have this farming villages where we have our own farming lands and all that. So as much as I value, like, farms are there and I really want to be a part of it now, you know, when I was growing up, then I really don't want to be a farmer. I mean, that's never the identity that I was associated with. Whereas if I talk to my farmers,